Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome to our Educators Forum. Um, we have a special guest today, um, Rebecca Rolnick, who is going to be leading our discussion and our insight here. We're going to give people a little bit more time to join us, and while that is happening, we're going to give you an overview of cool um, opportunities in the nature journaling community. But even before that, what we'd like to do is something that Rebecca often does is invites people in her workshops to start by just dropping into the chat something that they are grateful for. And she's asked us to all begin that way. So I'm going to invite everybody to take a deep breath and reflect on that for just a moment. Find something that you um, are grateful for, and just share that with everybody in the chat. Let's all take a moment to do that. And in a moment, Avea is going to let us know some of the opportunities that are going on, but just have a chance to breathe, feel your gratitude, and also notice some things that other people are feeling gratitude for. I'd also like to just take a moment to recognize that Brooke has lost a grandmother who was an important person in her life, and those times of transition can be really challenging. Um, Brooke, we send you our love and our strength, and celebrate the strength of your grandmother with you.
And if it's okay, I'd like to go ahead and read some of the gratitudes from the chat for the benefit of everyone who's not here live, if that's all right. I said, I'm thankful for the sunflower in my backyard. It's taller than me and has about 8 flowers on it right now. Billy Joe said, time with my family in nature. We're heading out camping again today. Brooke mentioned her grandmother. Said, I'm grateful to have had her in my life for so long. She was a wonderful woman. Claire said, an oriole visited my yard this morning. Deborah said, the birds in my backyard are beginning to trust me more and don't fly right off and forage nearer to me. That's really cool. Ivea said, grateful for friends. Aisha said, for no smoke, for being able to work at a desk outside, for the Buckeye butterfly I'm watching. Kate Ryder said, I'm grateful for being able to watch the moon rise on my drive home last night. Mary Larson said, grateful for family. Jack said, grateful for the sound of water. Chris said, grateful for my natural surroundings and ability to spend time here. And Shirley said, grateful for all those that teach and encourage us. So thank you to everyone for sharing.
We are honored to have Rebecca Rolnick with us today, who is going to walk with us through thinking more intentionally about strength-based learning as well as growth mindset and how those two pieces fit together. Rebecca is a prominent thought leader in our nature journaling community. She has helped many people find the strength of words in their nature journals, and is a very active part of the Educators Forum. In addition to that, she is the host of the series, or the workshop series Restoration, which has had several incarnations in our community, and she continually modifies and improves, and has really motivated and inspired many people in our community. We're really delighted and honored to have you with us today. Rebecca Rolnick, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be doing this workshop for everyone today. So I'm going to take you all through a short presentation that just to walk you through my thought process on this topic. So this is about how do we combine strength-based learning, a strength-based learning approach, and a growth mindset approach. So growth mindset is something that we tend, it's not going forward. There we go. So growth mindset is something that we tend to talk about a lot in the Nature Journal community. And so this is a quick review. This is contrasting a growth mindset and a fixed mindset, where in a fixed mindset, you don't think that you have the ability to improve. You have the skills and abilities you have, and that's it. So as a result, you avoid challenges, give up easily, see effort as fruitless or counterproductive, ignore feedback, and feel threatened by the success of others. Whereas when you have a growth mindset, you have the mindset that you have an ability to learn and improve. So you embrace challenges, persist in the face of setbacks, see effort as a way to get better. You learn from criticism and find lessons and inspiration from others' success. And all of this allows you to, as it says, reach higher levels of achievement. But there is another type of approach, which when I first heard of it, seemed to be almost at an opposite to growth mindset. So I started to wonder, how can you use them both at the same time? So a strength-based approach is, rather than focusing on shortcomings and failures, applying a strength-based approach improves self-awareness and develops confidence. So instead of only thinking about what are the parts of my life that I can improve on, what am I already good at? And how can I focus on that instead and boost your confidence and self-esteem? Focusing on students' strengths also pushes educators to provide more individualized instruction tailored to their students' specific needs. Once teachers become more aware of students' strengths and where they excel, they can adapt their instructional approaches and expectations to set them up for success. So it can be more individualized rather than expecting everyone to achieve the same things and at the same levels. Another quote from the National Education Association said, "It is the antithesis of finding gaps in learning and trying to fill them, which is the sort of deficit-based instruction we've done too often. With a strength-based approach, we identify what a student does know or what they can do and build on it. Success builds success." So still using a growth mindset, but starting with what you're already doing well. And strength-based learning mimics exactly what we do in quote unquote real life. Adults rarely pursue careers that require them to be average in everything, but instead pursue jobs in areas of interest and strength. And so the way that this plays out in some schools, and again, I am not a school educator, so there might be some people here who know more about this than me. Some schools will use online quizzes or assessments to help students figure out which strengths they are strongest at. So some schools use these talent themes. There are 10: achieving, caring, competing, confidence, dependability, discoverer, future thinker, organizer, presence, and relating. And I don't know exactly what each of those mean, but the idea is that once a teacher knows which students have which talents as their main strengths, then they can help the achieving students learn in a different way than maybe the presence students learn, or something like that. Some schools also use this set of strengths, which is from, I think, the VIA Institute. So there's this set of 20 or so strengths: zest, friendship, gratitude, love, perseverance, creativity, curiosity, love of learning, fairness, humor, bravery, hope, self-control, leadership, kindness, appreciation of beauty, humility, honesty, prudence, judgment, perspective, teamwork, forgiveness, and sense of meaning. And again, the students can take a quiz online and they'll get a list of their strengths in order and be able to compare that to other people's strengths. There's also this Strength Star, which is I found in the Dyslexia Empowerment Plan book by Ben Foss, which is actually, when I really started to think deeply about this topic, I think was a couple years ago when I read this book. And so this book is the Dyslexia Empowerment Plan, a blueprint for renewing your child's confidence and love of learning. And I found that this book was really relevant. I'm not dyslexic, but I found it to be really relevant for people with other disabilities as well, in a lot of reasons. And so something in the book, that he has a whole chapter about how to identify your child's strengths, because when somebody is diagnosed with dyslexia or something like that, it's really important not just to focus on the deficits, and these are the things that are hard for you, but what are also the things that you do really, really well, sometimes even better than other people. There are certain skills that people with dyslexia are often better at than average. And then he gave a bunch of examples of successful and famous people who are really good in these different areas, including somebody we know very well. Jack Laws is actually mentioned in the book for the work that you did on your field guide. So this is just another way of assessing somebody's strengths and saying, being able to be proud of those things instead of just disappointed in the things that we're not good at. But something is interesting is that, again, I'm not a school teacher, and so I came across this idea in terms of schools using a more of a strength-based approach, but I've also seen a really similar concept in a lot of entrepreneur spaces online and in books that I've read. And so I've seen this referred to as a few different names, but it's still basically the same idea of a strength-based approach, but rather than for students, for yourself as an individual, as an entrepreneur, I've seen it referred to as your core competencies, your zone of genius, or your superpowers. And the idea is that everybody has one, whether that's from your skills or your knowledge and expertise or your life experience and things that you can help people with, or even just your personality and who you are as a person or your communication style. And that these are the things that make you unique and the things that make you powerful. And so the question is, how do you spend as much time as possible doing work that's within your zone of genius, rather than spending time on things that are difficult or not interesting to you? And how can you team up with people who have those things as their superpowers so that you can be most effective by spending as much as possible of your time doing the things that are your superpowers. Let me take a quick water break. And so growth mindset is really, really important, but I think we also need to acknowledge more how there are limits to growth mindset. So again, in this book, there's an example. He makes a comparison with dyslexia and reading, how it's like a person with a wheelchair trying to train themselves to go up the stairs. They could practice and train really, really hard, but no matter how hard they try, it's always going to be hard, and they're never going to be as good as somebody else at going up the stairs. And he compares that to, as someone with dyslexia, having to eye read all the time is always going to be a certain amount of difficulty. And instead, if people can read audiobooks, now it's like going up a ramp on an electric wheelchair, and they can just zoom past everybody else now. And that's okay. So there was a quote in the book where he said, the worst lies related to dyslexia are the ones that we dyslexics tell ourselves. Our internal monologue often sounds like this: if I just try harder, I can catch up with everybody else. Or this is easy for everybody else, so there must be a way I can figure out how to do it like them. At a number of points in my life, I've had to realize that no amount of trying to blend in would make a specific situation workable. In short, I've had to realize that for me, it was instead time to move on. And I related so hard to this quote because, again, even though I'm not dyslexic, I do have a disability, which is a chronic illness. And yeah, so the example from my life is that you might not know this, but my original dream was actually not to be an environmental educator. My original dream was to be a field biologist, maybe an ornithologist or something like that. And I did do a few field seasons in the summers during college and then after college, and eventually kind of had to come to terms with the fact that it wasn't working out for me. It was just way too hard, and I found myself literally on a daily basis trying to catch up with everybody else when I would be outside with my team and they would all be walking so far ahead of me, and I was constantly just trying to keep up with them and get through as much of the work as I could, but I could never get as much done as everybody else, and I got pretty burnt out from doing that kind of work. But I realized eventually that I was more interested in being an environmental educator and learning new things all the time and getting to share that with other people. And that it was a better application of my abilities. I am very curious and a deep thinker, and I get excited about sharing things with other people, and that I'd be able to make a better difference that way than doing the actual physical work of the research. I can let other people do that part, and then I can just share their findings with other people. But it took some time to realize that and to change direction. And also the part where he says the worst lies are the ones that we tell ourselves, I would probably argue that it's not really coming from ourselves, ourselves being, people with a disability, but more that it comes from internalized ableism, from things we've been hearing our whole lives from the society around us that then become the thoughts inside our own head. And so this is kind of thoughts like, if I can't do this, that means I'm just lazy. I'm not really disabled. I'm not going to let my illness stop me. I'm not going to ask for help. I'm asking for too much when you're trying to get accommodations. And so that's something that people who have a disability or who maybe are neurodivergent often end up getting told and then telling themselves, you're just being lazy, just try harder, and then you can do it. And sometimes for some people that's true in some situations. Sometimes people just need to try harder, but in some situations it's not true and it's not helpful. So it becomes this real sense of shame. And so this is something I just came across while I was putting this together, but it really irked me. So I put it in here, this poster, and I found a few different versions of it. It looked like something that teachers would put up in their classroom. It says 10 things that require zero talent: being on time, honesty, showing kindness, being positive, using our manners, good body language, being coachable, doing a little extra, being prepared, and my Zoom thing is blocking the bottom one. But sounds great, right? But if you think about it for a second, not all of those things come naturally for everybody. For example, being on time, can somebody read the bottom numbers 9 and 10 because it isn't blocking this?
Oh, and number 9 says to be prepared, and number 10 says strong work ethic.
Yeah, so if we define the talent as some kind of natural born ability, well, some people don't have those abilities very well. Being on time, being prepared, and having a good work ethic require good executive functioning skills. And so that means those things can be really hard for somebody who has ADHD, for example. And whereas on the other side, using our manners or using good body language, how do you define those? People who are, for example, on the autism spectrum often have different body language or struggle to pick up on social cues or don't like eye contact, and that can be perceived as being rude. So there is a talent to that. And so if we think that something doesn't require talent, maybe sometimes it's because we have that talent. But that doesn't mean we can expect everybody to have that ability come easily to them. And so there's this idea I've seen again a lot in the entrepreneurship sort of spaces is, where do you then apply your time, effort, and energy on developing your skills? Do you put it towards your deficits, the things that are your weaknesses that are hard for you, and put in all this time and effort, energy just to become decent and passable at them? Or do you apply that same amount of time, effort, and energy to the things that are your strengths, that are that do come easily and feel fun, and put in that same amount of effort to really elevate that strength to become your superpower, something that you then become really, really good at? And not to waste your time on the things that you're not good at or you don't enjoy. And the thing is that even if somebody doesn't have a disability or doesn't have an official diagnosis for something, we do all have some amount of natural strengths and weaknesses. And we do all have limits. It's just that people with disabilities tend to come up against those limits earlier in life and have to deal with that earlier than other people. And so even if you are not neurodivergent or don't have a disability or anything like that, you can still pay attention to what do you feel are your strengths and weaknesses and listen to that. What's working for you, what's not. You still don't have to expect yourself to be the same as everybody else. So just like there are some challenges to a growth mindset, which we've discussed, there are some challenges to a strength-based learning system too. This quote says, "A strength lens implemented poorly could end up pigeonholing kids by leaving adults thinking, this one's the kind one, this one's the brave one." Then there's the fear that students who are taught they have natural strengths and weaknesses won't internalize the idea that they can improve and develop new talents with hard work. In other words, they won't have a growth mindset. Also, it can be hard for teachers to keep track of so many individual students and what's their top strength. think it's also important to think about here, what is our ultimate goal as teachers or even just as individuals for ourselves? Is it achievement, like in the first slide of growth mindset? To me, the goal is, how can I help people get to deep nature connection? And this is the framework that I use to develop the restoration class and other things that I teach. And so the idea is that over time, you can develop these 8 attributes of deep nature connection, which are full aliveness, love and forgiveness, quiet mind, presence and creativity, inner happiness, vitality, a commitment to mentoring and paying it forward, and empathy and respect for nature, and being truly helpful with your gifts and vision activated. And there are many layers to this teaching. We could probably spend a long time just talking about this circle, which I would love to do again here sometime. But again, one of the goals here of nature connection is using our gifts to be in service to the community. And so that's why we don't all need to have the same strengths. Just like different species have different niches in an ecosystem, we're in the community and we can all share our gifts, and we don't all have to be good at everything. So to me, this really speaks to the importance of long-term mentoring, having long-term relationships with people who know you really well, who can recognize and draw out your gifts as they evolve and emerge over time. If it's not just prescriptive in the way that, oh, you got this answer on the online quiz, therefore I'll use this strategy with you, but if it can be a little bit more organic than that. And another thing in Coyote's Guide to Connecting with Nature, which is also where the 8 Shields framework is used, it describes nature journaling as one of the core routines of nature connection that can get us to these attributes. And it describes journaling as a means of finding our gifts. And it says that's why it's good for everyone to develop their own style of nature journaling, whether that's with words or pictures or whatever, and to discover their own unique gifts to give to the world. So some questions that we can think about, and I have a lot more questions than answers, so we will see what direction that this discussion goes in. So for me, the really juicy question is, how do we combine the strength-based approach and the growth mindset? How can we apply a growth mindset more to our strengths than to just our deficits? Because it feels like we usually talk about it in terms of our deficits, but that's not the only time we can use it. So with the limited amount of time and energy that we have over the span of our lives, what do we decide to apply our growth mindset to? Is it the things that, is it our passion or enjoyment? Is it our natural talents? Is it the skills that we can apply to our goals? For example, I've been using my growth mindset a lot to learn about things like entrepreneurship and public speaking, because that's relevant to what I've been doing. Do we apply it to the skills that might be our deficits? We might not enjoy them, but we need to have at least a basic level of skill in order to function in society, like reading or social skills, or maybe driving a car. Or do we focus on the skills that will best help us to be of service and help others? What's the difference? Thinking about this terminology, I like to think about words. What's the difference between a strength, a talent, a natural born ability, and a gift? And if you don't know what are your core competencies or strengths, how do you identify them? How do you first find your comfort zone before you stretch outside of that? A lot of people don't even know or don't have the self-esteem to think they have any gifts or things they're comfortable with. But on the other hand, how do you avoid arrogance and overconfidence? How do we tell which approach a student needs in that moment to help bolster their self-esteem through a strength-based approach, or give them a little extra challenge with a growth mindset sort of approach? And how do we share our gifts in a way that feels good to us, not just using the strengths that other people tell us we have, but that, you know, those strengths might not necessarily be the ones we're most interested in using? How do we tell when something is actually one of our weaknesses, not just something we've been conditioned to think is hard and requires a lot of talent, such as math or drawing? A lot of people think that they're not good at those things, but maybe they just haven't even tried it. And how can we recognize and celebrate the times when giving up is actually an example of using growth mindset and adaptability? You know, the example I talked about from my life, I realized that being a field biologist was not really the best choice for me. But all along, my ultimate goal has been, how can I help to conserve biodiversity and connect people to nature? And I'm still doing that, just in a different way. So strength-based learning, some of the articles I read about it said that the effectiveness of it depends on having a culture that supports it in the school, not just the teacher talking about it sometimes. They have to really walk the walk. So how can we create a culture in a classroom or a school or a group or the nature journal community that is conducive to strength-based learning? How can we make a habit out of recognizing, drawing out, and celebrating students' strengths or gifts beyond using online quizzes? And how can we apply all of this to nature journaling specifically? So these are some of the resources that I used that you can check out. And now, before we open it up to the discussion, I'd like to give everybody a minute to let all of that process. And I'll put a timer on for 1 minute, and if you'd like, you can jot down some of your thoughts. What was your biggest takeaway from my thoughts that I just shared? What thoughts do you have that you might want to share during the discussion? And are there any more questions that you are wondering about? So let's give everybody 1 minute. It's just catching up on the chat, and that's been about a minute, so just wrap up whatever thought you're on right now, and let's come back together as a group. So now let's turn it over to all of you. What do you think? And thank you for listening.
So if you would like to join the conversation, you can use the raise hands function, or if that's not working on your computer, I'll be monitoring the gallery view, and you can just turn on your camera and wave at me, and we will bring you into conversation with Rebecca Rolnick. We're going to start with Eleni. Thank you so much for joining us. And
hello, everyone.
Let's try again.
Yes, that was my mistake, I think. All right. Thank you so much, Jack. Thanks, Rebecca, for a really wonderful, wonderful presentation. So I have two thoughts I wanted to share. One was in response to your question about how do we know what our strengths are? And I can share what has occurred to me increasingly over the past couple of months, and that is what raises my energy and brings joy. What raises my energy and brings joy. And where I'm coming from with that response is I just retired recently from 40 some odd years in higher education. It was a wonderful career in university, but I did many things that didn't bring me joy. And I did them well. So one could say those were my strengths. But when I think in the deep way that you've encouraged us to think, it's not just a strength, but it's something that brings joy. So that's my short answer to that wonderful question, because it encourages me to do the things that do bring me joy and not just the things that I'm supposedly, allegedly good at. And then the second thing is I question my own self about strengths and weaknesses. And it also occurs to me just from my own experience, and I don't think I'm unique, that things that look like strengths are weaknesses in other settings. So, and things that look like weaknesses are really superpowers. So maybe it's a weakness that one notices everything, or maybe that one is hypervigilant or fussy about something. But if you're a forensic anthropologist, wow, those skills are right up there on the A list. So both of these comments suggest to me deep engagement, both with conversation and also with deep witnessing of myself, because what seems on the surface to be strengths are weaknesses, and what are weaknesses end up being strengths. So I just want to thank you so much, Rebecca, for giving us a framework and holding the space for this amazing topic.
Thank you, Eleni. You brought up some really good points. So thank you.
Thank you.
I saw Avea and then Aisha.
So a thing that I'm thinking about is bearing in mind about finding our own strengths, or identifying what we feel is our own strengths versus what other people tell us we're good at and whatnot. I'm wondering how I can bring this in with students and the ways of having these conversations, so that way, if a student's doubting themselves, if I start to name strengths that they don't feel are strengths, but rather obligations, then I worry that I might have an effect on the student that I don't want to have. And so I'm trying to think about how to have these kinds of conversations, or how to spot the strengths in the students and have them open up a bit more about them. Because sometimes if we ourselves aren't tuned into a particular thing, we may not recognize it. And so I'm trying to figure out how to tune in more, or else how to give students the chance of feeling safe enough to talk about it out loud. And then also too about like, I want to also notice where students are excited. And I also want to be aware, though, that could be excitement because it's a strength, but then it could also be excitement because it's a challenge. And I think of that as being similar to Marley's metaphor about bread and butter, juice, and growth edge, although we couldn't think of a food metaphor for that third one. The bread and butter is sort of like when you're exhausted at the end of the day doing your nature journaling and you just do the thing that comes the easiest to you. That could be your strength. And the thing that doesn't require you to push yourself over the line of what your energy says you can do right then, when you don't have very many spoons, in other words. And then the juice, the thing it took me a while to realize is that juice doesn't necessarily have to be about strength that you already have, or about Growth Edge that you are pursuing. It could be either one, but it's whatever gives you energy or fills you up or makes you want to keep going. So it could just wind up being a really interesting question that you have. So I guess that to say that Juice can go with either the bread and the butter or the growth mindset. And I really wish we had a better name. I think somebody once called it like Royal Jelly Growth Mindset. I don't know, or Growth Edge, whatever. And then there's the one that's the more challenge, that you can be excited about, like being challenged that way, or like what Rebecca was saying to me at one point about maybe you have a really awesome mentor who makes you excited about that challenge, or who makes you feel like you have the courage to try it. So just trying to think about how to really spot the strength and help the student express it. Because the other thing is that they might have a strength that I don't recognize, but that they're actually the proudest of. And I would want them to be able to say, this is what I'm proudest of. So thank you for that. Lots of things to follow up on for me.
Thank you, Eva. And I just want to read this awesome comment from the chat before I call on Aisha. From Claire said, my biggest takeaway is, I think this will change my approach to meeting people to include a happy anticipation of discovering their strengths. Just like going on a hike, what will I see? Meeting people can be like, what gems will I find hidden in their being? I like the graphic of strengths. What a wonderful variety. Yeah, we never know when we meet somebody what their strength is. And Aisha, would you like to share?
Thank you. And it's Aisha.
Sorry, I should know that by
It's okay.
now.
It's okay. Losing my thoughts. I guess now at this point, now I'm riffing off Ivea instead of Eleni. Yeah, I was thinking about a teacher who was a really good mentor to me and still is, and how she was really good at always asking rather than pointing out. So always like, what do you think you're good at? And you're sort of, you mentioned that, when she's always asking that about adults too, like what made you excited about that? Or why did you want to do that? And she's a wonderful question asker about children and adults. And I use that all the time. And it was very good at, as a result, being non-judgmental, not showing that she thinks something has more value or is a strength that the other person maybe wouldn't, not putting words into people's mouths. So it was like, I wanted to share that. And then, of course, as Ivea pointed out, somebody doesn't always know what their core competencies are, or especially if you're younger, you haven't learned how to reflect on that. And I mean, for that, I feel like something like this, such big, deep topics, they require having a long-term relationship with students. Like you can't do it if it's just a 1 hour, one-off, really. I don't think. I mean, maybe you can, but it feels to me, it's like knowing them over time and building the language and helping them see their strengths and learn to articulate their strengths. And they just might not be able to in a, it's a one-off nature journaling class and you're walking around. And I think to even take that expectation off yourself as an instructor, like I can magically help them with their vulnerability or whatever. I was like, maybe I can, but sometimes that takes a lot longer than a one-off. Also, as Eleni was saying, is help me drop into how tired I am. And I think it's I'm often doing things I'm good at, but I don't get that joy or life out of. And I have to do things I'm good at to earn a living. And sometimes there's also the intense moments within it. And other times there's just not, So today I woke up like utterly depressed. And it was because I spent 2 solid days on the computer doing stuff for my job. And there will be moments that I'll pull on what I think are my real strengths, which is educating, but I don't get to do that all the time. And I think the last thing I wanted to say is like, I think this is going to help me give up on something. I'm putting together like a lesson piece or activity idea that also I wanted to sketch something in it along with things. And I'm not a drawer. And not in something I want to publish. I'm happy to do it in my nature journaling. And I'm like, can I just give up? Can I just find somebody who can sketch that little tree, a sample tree for me so I can move on to what I'm good at? So thank you. I think I'm going to give myself permission. And if anybody here wants to sketch a little simple tree for me, or I'll reach out to some friends, I just need a little tree. Just a little tree, please. And let me do what I'm good at. So that's what I wanted to share. Thank you, Rebecca, so much.
Thank you, Aisha.
I mean, literally before this, I was working on the tree and the arrows and was ready to weep. By the time I turned this on, I'm like, my arrows, my tree, perspective. So over and out.
Thank you, Jack. And then Chrissy.
Oh, actually, Brooke had her hand up before me, and then I'll pop in after Brooke.
Okay. Brooke. I can't hear you. Can you guys hear Brooke? Maybe check your speaker setting. Yes.
Oh yeah. Yeah, lean into that microphone. Ah.
Sorry about that. Okay, no, in all seriousness, you can hear me okay now? Sorry
Mhm.
for the delay. Okay. I've been writing a lot about flow lately and just trying to be more observant of where I get lost in flow, because that's showing me on this topic of, where do we find joy in something? It's usually where I get lost in something and lose track of time completely. And that's when I get out of that, I try to note that that was a moment when I got lost. That's when I really lost track of time for a while. And there was something about that my brain just loved. And so that's what I equivocate with like joy in doing, and it might not even be something I'm talented at. Like I'm not talented at drawing, but I get lost when I draw. I get lost when I write. There have been jobs though that I've had where I got to do a lot of those things like Eleni was talking about, where you were really good at it, but maybe you didn't love it. And so that was your strength because you were great at it, but it wasn't the thing that maybe you would choose to do if you were to just, I am just going to go in and get lost on something. You're not going to get lost on that thing. So I think, it seems like there have been these takeaways of how do we find what someone else likes to do, especially when they haven't identified that in themselves, and then refrain maybe from pigeonholing and building a complex within them about what they should be doing, but rather, where do they get lost? And that was it.
Thank you, Brooke. And yeah, it's really interesting because I was talking to Ivea yesterday about all this and talking about like how do we find our comfort zones. We're always talking about how we stretch outside of our comfort zone, but we have to find it first. But then I was also thinking about how it relates to getting into a flow state, like you were talking about, Brooke. And to get in the flow, it has to be right on that edge of something that's not easy, but it's also not too difficult. And so that might not be the part that feels most interesting might not be what's easiest.
Mhm.
So yeah, some more things to think about. And then Jack, you wanted to jump in.
Yes. Oops, hold on. I'm going to add this. There we go. My brain's going all sorts of different directions. This is really, really, really cool. And so what we're just talking about there made me think about, the things that we're, finding things that you're good at. And so often when we're thinking about that, it's in relationship to the product that comes out, the good drawing. And another thing to think about in this is to to be clear with yourself about the goal. So is the goal a pretty page, or is the goal a really juicy idea? Or a deeper observation, or a deeper connection with whatever you're looking at. And that I think it's useful to, like, if I'm thinking about, like, I'm not good at drawing, that's not my, and you know, that as in the product that comes out, the drawing isn't a pretty one. That can motivate some people to go like I'm gonna move away from that, but also be aware of, like, does making a little diagram sometimes help you, like, come up with a different idea, and just to move the goalpost about why you're doing whatever that thing is. I think is a useful thing to think about. Also, I put a link into the chat. I don't know if it will work for people. And what it is, it's a link about sort of the idea of learning styles was something that in some ways is similar to this idea of strength-based learning, but they're not the same. So the idea of learning styles was this idea that, you know, there's some people who are auditory learners, there's some people who are kinesthetic learners, there are these different learning styles. The idea was to find your learning style and then to kind of, you know, dive in there. And it was an interesting hypothesis some time ago in education, but there's no evidence for it. And when people got out there and studied it, the whole learning styles thing was like, oh, that was wrong. So I put a link into the chat about sort of debunking the learning styles thing. So it's different than strength-based things, which isn't saying, the problem with the learning styles idea is it really kind of, it pigeonholed people fairly severely. And that doesn't help. So it turns out that, you know, a lot of these different modes, you know, teachers ended up, because of the learning styles thing, teaching better because they were using a whole bunch of different modes. And it turns out everybody can benefit from all these different modes. But we don't want to kind of get in a track with that.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because I was also wondering about kind of the similarities and connections between strength-based learning and the learning styles approach and the, what is it called, like the 7 learning things.
Multiple intelligences. And...
Yeah, because I think that can be one of the potential weaknesses of strength-based learning, is that it seems in some of the things I've read about it, it starts to sound like it's getting a little bit too close to that type of approach where it's like, the test says that that your top strength is achiever. Therefore, you would learn best in these sorts of, with this sorts of instruction. And it seems like it's starting to sound a little bit too much like the learning styles kind of approach, where I think like, how can we have this kind of mindset and culture, but not pigeonhole people like that?
Yeah. And I think probably a lot, just sort of being aware of that, being aware of that does a lot to help you kind of prevent that. I think that Billy Joe's got something to share on this point. So I'm going to bring Billy Joe in on that. Hey.
So my take is a little bit different, but I'm sitting here listening to everybody and really enjoyed Rebecca's slide presentation and her chat. And I sort of come back to thinking that we see the limits to both and we see the strengths to both. And so, like, I wonder about taking sort of like a balanced approach, kind of like a balanced diet, right? So if you have somebody and you who recognizes their strengths, let's say, and they sort of focus on those to become confident in those, which gives them some confidence. does it then allow them through that confidence to be able to then try something that they might see as like a growth edge? So I think back to myself. So when I was like sort of in high school and college, public speaking for me was the death. Like, you've got to be kidding me, like full sweats, like they videotaped me one time and it was absolutely like the worst thing ever. I kept wiping my face like I had a beard. Like, honestly, it was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life, and like profusely sweating. And then I got into canoeing and I really enjoyed it, like a lot. And then I became an instructor and I was like, oh, like this is something that I'm actually pretty good at. And I always wanted to be a teacher, and I wanted to specifically be a phys ed teacher, but I was never great at sports. I was like, okay, like I always made the teams, but I wasn't first string, right? But canoeing, I was pretty good at that. And so I got a job where I had to stand on a beach at a provincial park and teach to whoever showed up. And that very first day, there was probably 75 people on the beach. And I thought, you've got to be kidding me. Like, I don't public speak, but what am I going to do about this? And of course, that fear comes in of somebody in the audience is going to know more than me, you know, blah, 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 blah. But I was like, but this is what I signed up for. This is what I am good at. And so I went out, and I have to say, like, I rocked it, right? And I did that job for 2 summers. And I now spend every day of my life standing in front of large groups. So I wonder, with that sort of balanced approach, like, here's your strength, here's something that you're pretty good at. And then are you like, do you then have the confidence to shift it to find that growth edge where you're then maybe not going to be sort of pigeonholed into saying, well, like, you're the good person, like you're the phys ed person, you're the jock or whatever. But what happens if that person has this like uncanny ability to be incredibly empathetic and is able to, you know what I mean? Like, to be able to shift that over. So can we take the strengths, build the confidence, and then introduce those sort of spaces where you're like, maybe you should try it, right? Like, give it a bit of a whirl. And then you start to see, like, oh my gosh, there's actually more strengths that have been hidden deep inside there that confidence is kind of overshadowing. I don't know, but that's kind of what this has been making me sort of think about.
Yeah, I was actually just going to read a comment put in the chat, but I will let you speak for yourself. She just raised your hand.
This reminds me of a podcast episode by Malcolm Gladwell. I believe it was a revisionist history episode from about 1.5 years ago. And it's about, I can't remember the country. There's another country where they had a lottery, or it was a school and then a country as well. They had a lottery to decide who would be in charge of certain civic duties. And rather than having the people who would have the personality types who are most likely to rise to the top in popularity and then get the position, even though maybe they weren't the best qualified, by being just selected randomly, if you wanted to participate, you could put your name in the bucket. Normally, you wouldn't have won through the campaigning process, but those people had the thoughtfulness, the insights, the ability just to kind of like see and notice things differently, to really play a better role at what they did. And so that's kind of, you know, Billy Joe, you were reminding me of that, of, you know, you didn't like public speaking and maybe you're still terrified of it, but like you're up and you okay, Jack? Sorry. I saw Jack scream just poof. So
just a minor earthquake over here in California.
So you're reminding me of that, of, you know, those people didn't feel like they had the strengths to campaign or even have a chance, and they wouldn't have had a chance. They wouldn't have been able to be selected in the classic style. But because they were given the opportunity, they still had the potential, they still had the ability to do it. And once they had the opportunity, they leveraged that ability and they were able to help in a very meaningful way.
That's really interesting. And Kate is raising her hand. I just want to also hop on Billy Joe's comment about like once you gain confidence, then more strengths can emerge. And how Brooke also said in the chat, I had to take personality tests in previous workplaces, and each person would be assigned a role and was pretty much expected to just continue to be that. And I don't know what's going on. Is that everybody's the noise? Maybe people can mute if they're not talking.
No. I
Responding
wasn't.
to me.
I wasn't upset about noise. I was railing against personality tests, and can we bash on personality tests for just a moment? Maybe Kate should lead that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, with Brooke's comment and what Billy Joe was saying, it reminded me of something else that I was thinking about in terms of all of this and the strengths, is that it's not one snapshot in time. Even if you do take one of those online tests like some of the schools do, maybe it can give you a good snapshot in time of like, what are you good at right now? But it will always continue. And maybe we do have some strengths and weaknesses that are just natural born, and that will always be true for our lives. But our strengths will always continue to evolve and emerge. And that's why we need people who can recognize those things in us when they come up. It's not just going to be, you're good at this, so this will be your top strength for your whole life. Anyway, Kate Ryder can talk now.
No, that's actually a perfect segue into what I wanted to say is, so at my workplace, we did personality tests and actually like sold, it was an HR company. And so we sold personality testing to other companies. And the whole idea behind it is like a strengths-based approach, is to make sure that your employees are serving in a way that works with their strengths. And that, and one of the ideas too, is to problem solve to help support employees who might have be in a role where they have to do things where they're not as strong at. And so, but my boss took it as, I tested not being excellent at details. I'm not super interested in making sure every little tiny thing is spelled correctly. But I was the marketing assistant. And so details kind of were my life. And instead of problem solving with me and being like, because what I really needed was just somebody to read over and just double check me when I was done, because I'm, very good at big picture and layout and coming up with big ideas and kind of getting the overall thing down. But I mean, and honestly, every workplace needs an editor after you've spent, 10 hours working on ad copy and an advertisement. You just don't see anymore any of those little small differences. And so instead, it was like always on me at the workplace. Like, oh, well, it was Kate's fault. Oh, didn't you notice that it was Kailua Kona, not Kailua? And like, no, I literally did not notice. And so that's kind of the danger of these things is it's not that, you can't focusing on strengths is such a positive thing. It's the pigeonholing comes in is when you feel like that's the only thing you're good at, or that the things you're get pigeonholed about the things that you're not good at. And so this book I just reread, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk, is kind of a classic one. And it talks about how to free children from playing roles. So I just wanted to read off these list of things that I thought were really important and kind of help counteract some of those dangers of pigeonholing. One is to look for opportunities to show the child or adult a new picture of themselves. And so that's something I've been doing. That's been an important part of therapy for me. Is my therapist is like, I don't really want to diagnose you with anything. I think you've just heard all these things all your life. And so trying to create a new story. And so when I came in saying, oh, I'm bad at details, I can't ever stay on top of things, she would point out times that I was good at detail. She'd go, but you did show up on time today, and you did notice this thing, and you did pay attention to this thing, and that is a detail. And so you are good at you can do these things. And so doing the same thing with our students, if a student says, oh, I'm terrible at math, and then they, happen to count something, or they measure something, or they say, oh, I think that's about 30 feet away. And you go, hey, look at that. That's a good estimate of measuring, so they start to create a new identity, put children in situations where they can see themselves differently. And so the example is, can you take the screwdriver and tighten the pulls on the drawers for a student who always sees themselves as clumsy? finding, somebody's like, oh, I'm really clumsy or I'm not athletic, right? So putting you in a new situation of canoeing, you are like, oh, I am athletic, I am strong, I am capable. And sometimes it's just, a very specific situation you might be clumsy or you might not be very good at, but you put in slightly different and you realize, oh, I do have physical skills, I do have this sort of thing. Or math skills or whatever it is you're trying to develop. Let children overhear you saying something positive about them, really trying to focus, when parents come to pick up, oh, you know what, Susie today did, she was so kind to this other student and, or she was really nice to this bird that had fallen and was really concerned about it, for a student that, maybe seems flighty or no, whatever sort of pigeonhole idea gets told, you try to find a positive, point it out in front of them. Model the behavior that you'd like to see. So, that's something that we do naturally. We talk so much about in this nature journaling thing is, we model how to do diagrams and how to do different drawings and stuff and model doing it ourselves and model being struggling with it or making mistakes ourselves or not getting it right. And just kind of carefully, being like, oh, okay, this is, I'm not a great drawer, but I'm going to try to draw this anyway, and not saying I'm not a good drawer. You might be saying that in your head, but saying, oh, I'm going to draw this and this is my goal, and trying to model that behavior. Be a storehouse for your child's special moments, being, and being a storehouse for yourself of acknowledging the times that you've done well and acknowledging your students at times, being like, oh, I remember when you did this, or I remember when you did that. Oh, do you remember that time? And doing that for yourself as well. And when your child acts according to the old label, state your feelings and our expectations. So sometimes these labels get associated with us because of, of genuine frustration. Sometimes deficits really do have an impact on others. If somebody has a hard time showing up on time, that does impact the whole group and then when you can begin. And so just acknowledging, not saying, oh, you're always late, you're always tardy, you're somebody who's not responsible, just saying, okay, hey, Johnny, our expectation is that we need to get started at 9. I really need you to be there, and then problem solving to help them find ways to get there on time. If that is, even if it's something they're not strong in. So anyway, I really recommend this book. It's not perfect by any means, but it's just such a great way of just kind of rethinking all of these sort of things. And having more of an expansiveness, and that both those things of growth mindset, and also really acknowledging those strengths.
Those also just apply directly into the parenting that I can apply today. This afternoon, I'm going to be putting your list to work.
Evea's had her hand up again for a while, and then Deborah, and then Billy Joe.
And then I'd like to get in that also to, I think I would like to address the idea of personality tests.
I do too. Actually, would it be okay if I let Deborah go first since she hasn't had a chance to speak today, and then I'll go right after her?
Love
Thank
this
you.
sharing.
Sure. Okay. Actually, thank you, Evia. That was very kind of you. And what I wanted to speak to was the talking to children, etc. Now see, I'm rushing, so I'm stumbling over my words. Sorry about that. I'm retired now, but when I was working, one of my main jobs was to teach early childhood educators how to include children with disabilities in their classroom. And so all of this has spoken to me throughout, and I really appreciate the discussion. One thing that I used to do when I would work with the teachers is, and I said train, I should have said facilitate, because that was the approach that we used, was a facilitation approach. In any regard, one of the activities was reframing, and I would have the teachers bring a list, well, they know their list of students, and then put descriptive words after each one. And the reframing part was then we'd have a little discussion, and then we'd go back and they would reframe what they wrote. And oftentimes, more often than not, the children with disabilities had negative comments, and they were not strength-based at all, or even the growth mindset. But they might say that a child was loud and obnoxious. And so I would have them reframe that into something that was positive. And so that comment might be, or their reframing might be then that they had confidence to speak out in front of others. It was just like light bulbs went off with these teachers that, here they had these sometimes stereotypes. Sometimes it was issues that they had and they just didn't like that type of child, or not child, but personality or behaviors. But it's something then that I've tried to do in my own life, with whether it's with people or even situations, is trying to reframe it into something that's positive and I can move forward with it. And then with the children, then they would build plans around that, individualization within their lesson plans around that. So that was it.
I really, really deeply appreciate that you led that activity with those teachers, Deborah, especially the reframing and the helping them to see the students' skills and the students' personalities in a new light. I really appreciate that. It's also really validating to hear all of that from you. Unfortunate, really sad to know that there are a bunch of teachers out there who will see only the negatives of their students with disabilities, but also validating to know that it's not just in the students' heads when they feel like the teacher has it out for them. So in a sad way, it's very validating. One thing that might be interesting too, and is in sort of a different context, to adapt some part of that activity when looking at strength and those kinds of things. And then it'd be interesting to have the teachers write down what they think their students' strengths are at the same time as the students themselves are doing that activity. So then that way you can sort of see what the teacher is, maybe the teacher might realize what they're accidentally maybe promoting, if the student themselves doesn't quite see that as a strength, but more like just something that they do, it can just open up more discussions, which just a thought. And then about personality tests, and I'm gonna let Billy Joe and Jack go on. I've got so many mixed feelings about them. Recently, a friend had posted something about the Myers-Briggs type indicator, and I couldn't remember what my result had been when I was made to take it. And I can't even remember if I had to take it at school or at work, but I took it and I got a response that I was not expecting. And so I read a little bit more about my type. It frightened me because some parts were really accurate. It helped me put a name to some of the problems that I have that I didn't really know how to put a name to before. So in that case, it was good from like that kind of I feel the same way about mental health diagnoses. They can be helpful in that they can give you sometimes words to use if they are accurate. But if used wrong, which a lot of times they are, they can be used to mark you as that person. Or then people will use that against you. And I think that that's why it's hard for us to talk about where our vulnerabilities are, is because we're very much, I don't know whether it's a society thing or a human thing or just a what thing, but we're taught to hide our vulnerabilities for a reason, because people use them against us. And so if, for example, if you don't match one of those 16 personalities, then you feel lost. If you do match them in some ways, then that can get used against you. It doesn't account for how much your choices can change, because you're expected to, like, for example, when they talk about how you perceive, like how you interact with the world, judging versus perceiving, well, what if you do both? What if it just depends? And what if there's other ways of doing it aside from that? But then they're trying to make you sort of match one category, and maybe they can say that it's about, oh, your tendency, there's more this than that, but that's still not really fair to this idea of us as people who are dynamic. So I have got a lot of mixed feelings, and I'm eager to hear more about that, especially because I've been thinking about them, Jack, in relation to some of our discussions about cold readings and about astrology.
Yes.
So someday, call me someday, because I have a lot I want to talk to you about with that. But I'm going to pass it on to Billy Joe and Jack.
Billy Joe, after you.
Yeah, sorry. So I was just thinking as Kate, and then actually Deborah speaking as well. And so when I have kiddos come up to see me, like I have such a limited time with them, so I don't really get to dive into who they are as like a classroom teacher would. And so I do find that in those small moments that I have, so they're with me for maybe like 3 hours, right? So you can only get such a snapshot of who they are. And sometimes I get to see them again, but for the most part, it might only be that one time. But I really think it's important to go along with what Kate and actually Deborah were saying, which is to actually affirm when you see something that they're doing that's pretty awesome. And I think it means not necessarily more, but I think it has sometimes a bit of a greater impact when it's someone that they don't know very well and someone that they haven't really had that deep relationship with. And so I just want to, like, an example is we had a camp come up to the field centers this summer, and it's called Bridging the Gap. So we have a couple of high schools, but they have a whole bunch of feeder schools, right? There's a whole bunch of middle schools, and then they all kind of go to high school. They don't really know each other. And so they've been running a lot of these camps this year to get kids to kind of know each other a little bit before they kind of jump into high school. And they had some grade 11 and 12 leaders. And I had done one for a different school, and I really couldn't tell who the leaders were to who the grade 8s, grade 9s were. And I was like, holy, so I'm not sure the leadership was right there. So it is what it is. Then we had this other school come up, and they walked in the room, and I knew exactly who those leaders were. And they were above and beyond in their kindness, in their inclusivity, in their level of maturity. And so before saying anything to the students, I said to the teachers, how are the leaders chosen for this position? And they said, well, we try to look for kids who are not normally in those leadership positions in school. So they're not a part of council, they're not a part of this, they're not a part of that, but that they show leadership qualities in other places. And so I said, they're fantastic. Like, they were just absolutely amazing. And so my colleague and I made a point in front of everyone is to acknowledge just how awesome that they were and acknowledge all of those individual attributes that we noticed that each of those 5 students were doing. And the thing that we noticed the most was that their backs got a little straighter. You know, their head got a little bit taller. And you're like, that's what you want to see when you see that acknowledgement, because these aren't the kids who are, you know, the team captains or, you know, the student council who are getting these affirmations all the time because of the positions that they are in school. And so to see that, then, you know, it makes it such more impactful. And it wouldn't have been as impactful if we had have like brought them off to the side and said, I think you're doing a really great job today. It depends on the kiddo, but we felt like these kids really needed to be recognized in front of everyone because of what they were doing, and that this camp was going to continue as well. And I just think it's really interesting. And you know, even from a personal perspective from myself, I was always labeled the kid on every single report card. Billy Joe socializes too much. She's really loud in class. If she didn't socialize so much, she, you know, would get better grades and, you know, blah, 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 blah. Billy Joe's too loud. I was constantly getting shushed in the library, like, you know, whatever. And to now, all of those things that they were saying were bad about me are some of my biggest strengths in the career that I've chosen. And so I think back to that, and now my youngest is also being labeled in very much the same way. And I'm always like, you know what? She's not a bad kid. She advocates for herself. She stands up, and you'll know when she's mad. You'll know when she's happy because she will let you know. And I was always told, oh, you're so sensitive. You wear your heart on your sleeve, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yes, I do. So you will know all of those things about me. And so it's that reframing about what is the positives about it instead of just being labeled, you talk too much, you're too loud, blah, blah, blah. You could be better at all these other things. Well, all I needed was the right space because I excelled once I got out of public school. So it's interesting when you reframe things and give the support where it's needed to watch some of those kids really find their space and to really grow in there is, it's really interesting. So I just want to sort of, take what Kate and Deborah were saying and give a little, life context to it in personal experience to that. So it's pretty awesome. So I totally agree with both of you. It's pretty awesome.
I think you're muted, Jack, but we would like to know what makes you make that face when you're thinking about personality tests.
First of all, I any camp that you are leading, I want to send my daughters there, Billy Joe, and you, Kate. We want in. So yeah, just we could probably unpack this a lot more, but this isn't quite the right context. But it is related to some of these things which we're talking about. So these kind of these things like the Engrams and the Myers-Briggs personality tests are unscientific claptrap. Completely unscientific, but there's a system, and that makes people think that there is legitimacy to it. And they rely heavily on generalizations and Barnum statements, which are statements that are kind of broadly true. And you read your personality profile. It's just like reading your horoscope. But it is, but it's a little bit closer. So in psychics, there are what's called a hot reading and a cold reading. A hot reading is when you've done some research on somebody, and so you can pretend that you have discovered things about somebody. A cold reading is when you're just using sort of, facial expressions and like when they lean in or their back straightens. You're noticing those things and kind of picking up on those cues, but it's all a stage trick, right? And the Myers-Briggs is a hot reading, right? And but at the dangerous, so you can come up with these things where somebody will kind of go, oh, that's really true for me. And also what happens is people will remember the hits and forget the misses. And so the parts of it that are more true makes you like, wow, you really have got me nailed. But and then the dangerous thing comes in, and that is that at the end of these tests, they give you your label. Absolutely destructive, right? So with psychological analyses, there's some research that shows that it is helpful for a therapist to kind of know somebody's diagnosis in leading a therapy session, but it actually hurts the patient to know theirs. Because with labels, there's two things that happen. One is that the label becomes your identity. Right? You say, oh, I'm this, and not only that, there was a process that you went through to get that. All right, boom, that's your identity. And so that's for you. But if your employer also gets that, the label becomes their expectation. And then anytime it's remember the hits, forget the misses. That then just gets reinforced. And there's also some research that says that once you have your label and your identity, you will tend to make and set goals that reinforce that, as opposed to try to go against that. And so the Myers-Briggs, it is everywhere. It has crept into education. I have been in 2 educational institutions where they trotted it out. One was, I was working at the Teton Science School. They had everybody take Myers-Briggs, right? And the California Academy of Sciences, right? So this is a scientific institution, right? This is utterly unscientific, blah, blah. So that's, and so, but then kind of tying back into our strengths, just be aware of the power of our labels, right? Whether we're talking about a strength or a weakness, we identify by those labels and we set expectations by those labels. So you can, with a group of students, if randomly teachers are told that these kids are the achievers and these ones aren't, the grades will reflect that at the end of the year. And you can randomize it. They've done that. Ouch. Right? So as we're going into this, sort of thinking about like, how can we, there's power and there's strength in helping somebody kind of recognizing that I can do this, but there's a shadow side to these same things. So I'm going to get off my soapbox now, but if we ever want to kind of, maybe we should just do it. Find some time to kind of go do a deep dive into personality tests. I don't know if that really kind of applies to what we're doing here in our educators forum, but we'll consider that. So Yvette, over to you.
Considering that we could use not only that, but we can also carefully monitor our own reactions and our own biases about each of those, and maybe even find and identify some common traps that we ourselves fall into, then we can learn to be more self-aware as educators when dealing with our students. I think that would be good, because even if we can know the danger of things like the personality tests, it'd be nice to see where we're stuck. Use the personality test conversation piece as a conversation, as a way of sort of having a jumping off point from where we need to free up our thinking and where we might be more tied in than we realize, if that helps. Maybe.
Yeah. I wouldn't recommend that anybody go get a Myers-Briggs. Or an Engram or these sorts of things. I just am so angered by them.
You must have think I'm joking when I say this, Jack, but you don't even recommend the dope birds?
The what?
Have you ever had to take a dope birds one?
Dope birds. Oh man. No, I haven't.
Oh God. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have mentioned that. I don't want to anger you because they're using birds for evil, but there's this one that they made me take at one of my last jobs where you wind up, I can't even remember what the axes were, but there were axes and then you got separated into one of 4 quadrants. And so D was for dove, O was for owl, P was for peacock, and E was for eagle. And it all had to depend on your style about whether you liked being a leader, whether you were most social, whether you liked being quiet in the background, left alone to do your work in data analysis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I wound up getting placed as a dove, which meant really, really, kind and thoughtful of other people, but then really quick to shut down when people just, and it's kind of like they had all of the people from the different birds meet with each other. And I don't even know what everybody did. I guess we squawked at each other and gossiped for like 15 minutes. I don't even know if they ever used this stuff, but I'm so sorry that they used birds for evil. And I would not recommend taking that quiz. We can be all of the birds, depending on the day and depending on what we like.
Yeah. So yeah, these tests, they're not reliable. You'll get different things different times. The tests also they put on continuums things that aren't on continuums, and you get there's all sorts of sort of scientific level frustrations with these. But another test that has been done is people have constructed had people take these personality tests, and then based on those, they get a personality description, and people read their descriptions. And people are then asked, how accurate and how specific is this to you? And people will say, extremely specific, extremely accurate. They give these tests really kind of high degrees. But in these experiments, they're giving everybody the same results. And so what we do is we read our own results and we find reasons to agree with whatever we've gotten. Yeah. Yeah, these are they're anyway, I'm taking us sort of down a path that is leading away from the main discussion. But beware of personality tests if your workplace gets scammed into using them as a tool for assessment or placement or anything. You can do some skeptical education with your administrators.
Just wanted to say, like, I really liked Jack's point about maybe coming back to this and then trying to find our blind our labels that we might have stuck onto ourselves and help to kind of come through those and work through those. I think that would be something really helpful, because I realized, especially like hearing Billy Joe's story, the question that I asked, I actually wrote down after, our little minute after Rebecca's presentation, was how do you help a student grow if it's an area that's a personal weakness? And so feeling like, oh, I have this weakness, so how can I possibly help you grow in this way? And then once he said that, I was like, oh, is that actually a weakness, or have I like labeled myself as being weak in that area, and I might not really be, or had that label put upon me. And so I think having, maybe some breakout sessions and opportunities to kind of explore some of that would be really, could be really helpful.
That would be really useful. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying, let's also kind of break down and analyze some of the labels which we have been given and possibly internalized to help us have more insight into that. And then that could also then perhaps help us think about how to break our students or children free of those same shackles. So I will look into some bogus personality tests for everybody to take then. That could be a fun discussion. Oh, Deborah.
Okay. I just wanted to mention, in terms of the strength-based model, that actually is a medical model. And if you think about it, I know, I'm sorry, this is off the personality, but I wanted to get it in. During COVID, I think we were all just shocked and alarmed when we heard that in some hospitals, especially in Europe, they were having to triage patients, and the ones that were most likely to survive were the ones that were chosen to put on ventilators, because the ventilators were limited in numbers. And that comes from that strength-based model. And that's something that I know was woven into special education and other things early on. So I don't know if anybody's interested in that, but I thought I would share it.
Excellent. Thank you. So I'm one of these people who overshares in these sorts of things. So in terms of facilitating the discussion, I want to defer to you, Rebecca. I don't want to. I feel fearful of kind of starting to kind of be too much here in what I really want to be your show. So sorry about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything specific to say right now. So if you do, you can go ahead.
Okay. One thing I'm kind of a takeaway for me right now is just to have humility in the face of how complex this is. Right? And we're sometimes we wonder about what we wonder about, like, what is the right thing to do. I think that if we are paying attention and coming at this with a sense of love and really giving our deliberate attention to whatever children we're working with, we're going to end up okay. And the any kind of missteps which we take, whoa, there's that earthquake again. Yeah, I'm sitting on the floor of the place where I am, and so every time I move my knees, it kind of like does this. So, but that just it's we don't want this to paralyze ourselves. Like I don't know, am I going to be more growth or more? We want to do our best in the face of whatever child we're sitting with in the moment. And I think if these things are on our radar, we're going to we'll make better decisions. And also, kids are resilient. I went through all sorts of crazy things and had some teachers who were very angry people. And in the end, the ones who paid attention and gave me love won out. And that makes a big difference. So just to mess with people's heads also, I'm going to drop into the chat a personality test. And this is one that is incredibly accurate. And I think you will be really interested in how specific and appropriate it is exactly for you. All right. So just going to drop that in there. Don't take it during this discussion, but later on, if you want, shoot me an email and just let me know how well it pegged you to a T. Have some fun with that.
I like that most of us's immediate response was, "This is sus."
Yeah, totally sus, totally sus. Just let me know. Send me an email and let you know how well that did. There's actually kind of an interesting thing behind this, and yeah.
I'd remembered what I was going to say earlier, and I know I'd written into the chat, and it was a question about why do we take personality tests and go to psychics and go to astrology and all of that. And I think part of it might be trying to know ourselves better, and then also trying to let ourselves be known to other people, either because we would like a listener or because we think that if we can give this particular thing, then we'll give people more information about us. And one thing that Rebecca asked in response that I really appreciate is, so how can we get to know ourselves in a deeper and more meaningful way? I love that question. So I want to draw attention to that. And then how can we also know our students in a deeper and more meaningful way?
I have to write that down.
Was there anything else anybody wanted to talk about today? Or should we give Rebecca our sincere love and thanks for leading this discussion, and our hope that we will do this again? Because I think that this is the kind of discussion that isn't done, and it's the kind of one that we're going to need to keep open and keep thinking about. And as we learn to find these strengths in ourselves and other people, it's a reminder that repetition is important. To do this activity again and again is important, so that we don't forget how, so our students don't forget how. And because of something wise Rebecca told me yesterday, which is that the ones who really help with the nature connection, the educators who do, are the ones who themselves already have that connection. And so maybe to teach strengths in our students, we need to know that for ourselves first, of ourselves.
That is a scientifically backed statement. I haven't read the study, so I can't say how good the study is, but there was a study on that people who are connected to nature and have those attributes of deep nature connection themselves, their students will pick that up more so than the ones who just have the pedagogical training. So all of this stuff, it's really important to think about, not just in terms of our students, but for ourselves. And it's an ongoing, lifelong process. Because by doing it for ourselves, that's how we'll help other people to get there.
Rebecca, are there any thoughts that you wanted to give to round out our discussion and to send people home with, or not necessarily a statement, or is there a question that you wanted to? I love that when you were, can I just sort of say pedagogically that when you were ending your presentation, you did that by giving us all of these questions, like, here's something to think about, here's something to think about. And I thought that was such a honest and humble and powerful and authentic way of handling that. That was brilliant. So do you want to just take one of those questions, or is there a different question that you might want to drop on us, just to leave us with a question mark in our head? And I think which would be one of the most wonderful ways to go away from this discussion.
Sure. Yeah, let me think about that for just a second. I put the slideshow into, I put the link into the chat. Anyone with the link can access it.
Will we be able to, would we feel comfortable when we post this discussion online to share that this slide deck with people?
Yeah, you can put that in the description on YouTube.
Great.
So people can look if there's specific slides you want to take a closer look at or spend some more time with. Yeah, I think a question that we can leave with, first of all, whatever questions are most interesting to you that you want to explore further. And I think just bringing us back to that question of how do we balance it? How do we decide when do we use a growth mindset to apply to our weaknesses or our deficits? When do we use a growth mindset to bolster our strengths and make them even stronger? And how do we balance that? How do we make those decisions for ourselves?
You are absolutely brilliant, Rebecca. Thank you so much for taking your time, your thought. In order to pull this together, there's a lot of work behind this, and I feel really enriched by this short period of time in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack, for creating this space every week and this community. I'm just and giving all of us the opportunity to share our thoughts and our voices. I just feel really lucky to be here and to have found this group, and every single week just getting to be here and participate, I feel like I found my people.
It's interesting, and we started this just as to just to have a few of these discussions, and then this community crystallized, and there's some of the most thought-provoking, like this is the most thought-provoking discussion that I've been in this week. And these educator forums, it's really useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Thank
Shall
you.
we wrap?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you again, Rebecca Rolnick. If people want to follow you or learn more about you, where can they find you online?
Oh, I don't have all the links right available, but you can just go to my website first thing, RebeccaRolnick.com. It needs to be updated, honestly. It's missing a lot, but you can find my email there if you want to reach out to me. Or yeah, you can subscribe to my newsletter if you want to follow along with what I'm doing.
Excellent. And we also, you can, Rebecca's workshop, Restoriation, is another great way to kind of do a deep dive into the sort of thinking that Rebecca brings to the world around her.
And I'm planning to teach it again in the fall, probably after Wild Wonder, so it's not directly competing, but keep an eye out for that if you're interested.
Absolutely.
And that's all about this idea of how do we use nature journaling as a way to heal our relationship with the natural world and think more ecologically, essentially. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Take care,
you.
everybody. Be kind, be well, and I will see you again soon.
Bye.